All right. Welcome to the Unlocking Manhood podcast. Today we've got a special guest, Gabriel Hamel, who is my very own wrestling coach in high school. So I'm very excited to have him on. And I'm not just having him on because of that. He's been very successful, number one, as a man with his family, with his contributions to community and elevating others, and notably, visibly, his success in real estate and investing and living life on his own rules, not by the traditional playbook. So that's why I wanted to have him on today, is to discuss how he got to that path of playing by a different set of rules than the status quo and what mindset shifts he had in that journey. So Gabe, welcome to the program.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Thanks for the kind introduction. Appreciate it.
So jumping in, I always like to start at the beginning of your journey, kind of, where a lot of the kids that are jumping into some of our programs are at, dads are involved as well. But when you were in middle school, how was your experience with school? What things worked well? What things didn't work for you?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think middle school is a weird time. I mean, you and I both had middle schoolers. But when I think back to school, like middle school, high school, especially middle school, I don't feel like I had a lot of direction. I had great parents in the sense, like I always knew I was loved. I had a mom that definitely would tell me, hey, you can do anything you put your mind to. And I just really at a young age almost like foolishly believed it, but I ended up kind of taking that mantra into my entire life. Like, hell yeah, I can do whatever I want. And then I had a dad who just saw the good in people, and it seems strange as a kid, right? Like some of the people that most people would just bypass would end up at our house for Thanksgiving, right? Because my dad would see the good and invite him over. But middle school itself for me, like, I don't know, like I was the kid that stayed in school for the social aspect, and then once I got to high school, really high school wrestling and then the social aspect of high school is really the only thing that probably kept me there.
This is important because this is a huge part of, is in our journey, moving away from the pack and starting our new pack. What things about what social activities or what things drew you into that connection with people, and as you wanted to stay deeper in school?
Yeah, I'm not really sure. Like, I mean, I would get in trouble in middle school quite a bit, but it wasn't like I wasn't malicious. I wasn't a bad kid. I just did stupid stuff. Like, I just didn't think things through, right? But I did like people, and so I enjoyed being around people. I think people energized me. Like looking back in those years, I definitely and consciously like wanted to be around people. And I enjoy that to this day in a different way. Like I'm very, cautious with who I spend my time with. I want to make sure I'm spending my time with people that elevate me, that energize me, that don't drain me, that bring something positive, where I could bring something positive to them. But yeah, it's interesting. I don't think I had a lot of direction until I had direction, right? It wasn't until I got into more of those high school years and I joined the wrestling team that then I had a reason to show up. I had a reason to work towards something, to work hard at something. And that's really what kept me there more than anything. I actually went out. I'm sure I've told you this story because I was your wrestling coach, but yeah. I went out for wrestling because I wanted the coach to leave me alone. Like he kept bugging me every day, like, hey, just come out for 2 weeks, just give it a try. And finally I was like, I'm going to go out just and try, just so this guy leaves me alone and quit asking. I'm going to give it 2 weeks. And then that ended up changing my life. And I think too, I had like a little bit of a chip on my shoulder. Like I grew up playing a lot of sports. I was okay, but I didn't excel at any of them. And then I found a sport where I felt like, hey, I could actually excel at this if I put in the work, and I believe I would be good. And so I was all in.
Nice. So you found wrestling that really sparked your drive, and you started setting goals within that. How did your goal setting process go, within high school once you found something you were really passionate about?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think I had goals before that too, but it was just different, right? Like also, I guess going back to middle school too, like I had a paper out from like 12 to 16 because my parents were like, hey, if you want more money, you gotta work.
Ooh.
And so I was up every day at 4:45, 5 o'clock doing a paper out from the time I was 12 to 16, just so I had my own money. And so like, there were some goals within that, right? Like I saved up to be able to buy my first car. But specific to wrestling, and I think even more so before that, like in the weight room. I mean, we both have had Chad Kessler as a coach. I came into high school as a 90-year-old, 90-year-old, a 90 didn't come into high school as a 90-year-old. I came into high school as like a 90-pound freshman, right? And I got into the weight room, and like I just enjoyed it. I was a little guy, but I saw the results. The more that I worked, I saw those results, and it's something that really just resonated with me and made sense. And so between the work in the gym and having coaches and people around me that pushed me and believed in me and said, hey, I mean, one of the first things I remember Kessler saying, he was like, hey, just slow down, get your form right, do it right. And I remember from my freshman year to my sophomore year, like I just got so much stronger, and it did a lot, not just a lot for me physically. I remember it really boosted my confidence, right? And then it gave me confidence just as a person, as a young man going through early years of high school. Gave me a lot of confidence, on the wrestling mat, and I just kind of taken that into my entire life. I mean, I've actually never stopped working out from the time I was 14 to now I'm 40. Those workouts have changed. What I do now has been different throughout the years, but that's just been part of my life, part of who I am. And health is important, and that started with just somebody at the high school weight room saying, hey, let's slow down and get your form right and put in the work.
Heck yeah. I love that. So this is a little bit of a sidetrack from where I thought this was going to go, but I want to dig into this.
Sure.
Do you think it's possible to have a transformation with your body and not have a transformation with your mind?
Ooh, that's a good question. Do I think it's possible to have a transformation with your body, not your mind? No, I think everything starts in the mind. I think everything starts in the mind. I mean, when I think of like every idea, every great invention, anything ever created, anything that exists started in the mind first. And I think too, like specific to working out, like I love what it does physically, but what it does mentally for me too is so important. And I've seen the shift. I've watched people lose 100 pounds. And that's it's a mental shift. It's a physical shift, but rarely does someone lose 100 pounds without wanting it, without believing it, without having something in front of them to go towards. So I think it's really even more mental than it is physical.
I agree 1,000%. I see that, especially as men, as young men, you're coming out of middle school and you're just barely in puberty, and you go through that, you mature physically, you mature with your confidence. And I think that the weight room is an important spot. And sometimes there's a bad stigma around, like, if you're in the weight room, you're an alpha and douchebag. And I think that that's something that we've got to work as a community, as a society to push away, because there's so much benefit to having a strong, fit body. I remember I was at the dog park a couple years ago, and a dog came up behind me and like wiped out behind my legs. I went flat on my back, got up, like, oh, I'm okay. Because I was strong. I was able to endure, some contact and some adversity physically. And I know that if I had not been training, that probably would have been pretty bad.
Yeah, no, I've had similar circumstances. If it wasn't for, my background in strength training and wrestling, right? And the other thing to note too is like those were my classrooms. Like that's the weight room and the wrestling room, like through especially those high school years, that was my classroom. I learned more about life. I learned more about who I am and who I was becoming as a person in those rooms. And I've taken, and that may not be for everybody. Like some people have more of an academic brain, but that just wasn't me. And so I don't know what my life would have been like if I didn't have a place to put that energy and put that uh, towards, And so really, those were my classrooms, and that's where I showed up and I put in the work. I had a hard time sitting still in class. I had a hard time, listening and paying attention. Like I didn't even know what was going on half the time in my other classes, but in the wrestling room, I was focused and I was determined. In the weight room, I was focused and I was determined. And so, and I used to think I didn't like learning. Now I love it. Like I always have, an audio book, a podcast. Like I love learning. The classroom just wasn't the environment for me. It is for some, it just wasn't for me. And so I actually thought, hey, I don't like to learn. I don't like education. And that wasn't true either. It wasn't really until after high school that I found other areas that I enjoyed learning and that I could learn on my own in a non-classroom environment.
I like that. Nice. So I want to go deeper into high school, into your senior year, because I love this story. And maybe even to the state tournament your junior year. Let's start in there. What was that process and that experience like?
Yeah, so my junior year, I love kind of going back to this because I know the story. Some don't. So my junior year, first of all, my freshman year, I got my ass kicked all the time. I didn't start wrestling until my freshman year. Sophomore year, a little less. I got a lot stronger, but I still, like, from a technical standpoint, I was never a technician. I didn't have time. When you start as a high schooler, you got to get real good at a few moves. And that's what I did. I got good at a few moves, and believed I could win. So my junior year, I actually broke my collarbone. Do you know this part of the story?
No.
So I broke my collarbone a month before the district tournament, 4 weeks before the district tournament. I went snowboarding. I landed on my shoulder. It broke in half. They set it right there, on the mountain. And I go into the doctor and they're like, yeah, it's broken half. It's going to be 4 to 8 weeks to heal. And I'm going, shit, I have a district tournament like in 4 weeks of that date. I actually walk out of the hospital. There's nothing they can do. All they do is set it and they give you a little figure eight kind of brace to keep your shoulders back.
Yeah.
I walk out and someone sees me and they're like, hey, don't you wrestle for South Eugene? And I was like, I do. And then I got in the car and I started bawling because I'm like that's how I identified, like, I'm a wrestler, right? That's how I identified back then. And so they told me, hey, 4 to 6 weeks. I had never qualified for the state tournament before. I got a doctor to clear me like the day before the tournament. So I did some like shadow wrestling. I got cleared to wrestle the day before the district tournament.
Wow.
So I hadn't been on the mat actually wrestling for 4 weeks. It was not 100% healed, but it was healed enough that I was able to convince them to clear me. They probably shouldn't have. I ended up beating the 3rd seed and qualified for the state tournament. First time qualifying for the state tournament. I went there, was 2 and out. So at a wrestling tournament, you lose 2 matches, you're out. So I went 2 and out. Not only did I not place, I didn't even win a match. That night, I was like, I'm going to come back next year. I'm going to win a state tournament. And so I decided in my mind, the end of my junior year, like literally the day after my last match of my junior year, I said, I'm going to come back and win a state tournament the next year. And so I believed it in my mind. I put in the work from that day forward. And the next year I went undefeated in the state of Oregon, won a state tournament, and that helped define a lot of my life.
Wow. Undefeated that senior year. And it all started after those 2 losses from what I recall. And
Yep.
How did that space transform you? How did it feel? And what made you feel called from, just barely getting back in? Some people might be like, well, awesome. I made it in. Just getting here was an accomplishment, but you switched the mindset completely.
Yeah, it was just a belief. Like I believed I could do it. Right. I was fully committed in my mind. I think everything starts in the mind. I obviously have to put in the work, right? You can't just be like, hey, I'm going to win a state championship and do nothing. I wrestled all off season. I went to, I was qualified for the national team and went and wrestled in Fargo. I wrestled in the preseason. I lifted hard. I ran hard all preseason. And I did everything what it takes to get that accomplished. But it started in the mind first. I believed it full-heartedly, 100%, fully committed in my mind that that's what would happen, and that's what happened.
And it just hearing your story about doing extra tournaments, training year round, you built yourself into the state champion before you even got to the season.
Absolutely. I mean, I believed it in my mind full-heartedly, 100%. And if there was ever doubt, I got rid of that real fast. But there was almost no doubt. I had convinced myself in my mind that I would be a state champion that year.
I love that. So after high school, you got this state championship under your belt. You're moving on. What was the next decision for Gabe?
Yeah, I was a little bit lost for a little bit. I mean, even after, so I had actually joined the military in high school. So I joined the Army National Guard 1 week in a month, 2 weeks a year. Just like the commercial. It wasn't quite like that, as you'll hear. So I joined my senior year. The co-captain actually was like, "Hey, let's go play in the woods once a month. Sounds good." So I actually had to get my parents to sign off because I was 17, but I was legally allowed to join the military, and so that senior year too, like after the state tournament, I actually felt a little bit lost because I really put a lot of identity into me being a wrestler. And so I remember a lot of emotion even that day of like, oh shit, I've accomplished this goal, but who am I? Like what, now what? I didn't really have a now what. Everything I had worked for had happened, right? And so then I graduate high school and I'm doing the once a month training. And so that's 2000 is when I graduated high school. Went to basic training that fall, and just kind of took some odd and end jobs and some different things. And then I read a book that changed my life. It was the book Rich Dad Poor Dad. A lot of people have read it, and most people that are in real estate have read the book. It's not a how-to book, but it was probably around 2002 I read that book. And it's I used to be embarrassed to say it, but now I'm like proud of saying it. Like it was the first book I actually ever read in my life, cover to cover, word for word. So I got all the way through school without ever physically reading a full book, which is amazing that can happen, right? So I read that book and I get convinced in my mind I am going to be financially free and real estate's going to be my path. And again, it's not a how-to book. It just talks a lot about finances and financial freedom and taking that into your own hands. And that what wasn't appealing to me is getting a job and working for someone else. I didn't want someone tell me what to do. I didn't want to have a boss. I wanted to be independent. I wanted to be financially free. I wanted to build wealth, and I was convinced that real estate would be my path forward for that. So that's 2002. I took some different odd and end jobs, and then in 2003 I got a phone call and I was deployed 5 days later. I got a call on a Friday night. Saturday morning I had to be in. Sunday morning I had to be in. I had Monday and Tuesday to take care of any personal affairs that I needed to take care of. And Wednesday we were gone. I was sent over to Iraq and Kuwait for about a year. And over there, I told all my friends, like, hey, I'm going to come back. I'm going to build this real estate empire. And most of my friends said, you're fucking crazy. I was living in a friend's attic for $100 a month when I got deployed. So wow. I'm telling them my big dreams. I'm going to build this multi-million-dollar real estate investment business. And they're like, you're an idiot. You're living in someone's attic for $100 a month. You didn't go to college. You were working, minimum wage jobs before this. How the hell are you going to do that? And I was like, I have no idea how, but I read this book and I'm going to do it. I'm going to figure it out. And came back and bought my first house in 2005. And I did just figure it out. And I've been buying property ever since.
That's awesome. I love hearing that story every time. Like the thing is, we're resonating, we're going through all these little journeys and steps. There were so many little steps that you took and choices that you make that seem very small, but made a colossal change. Choosing to go out for wrestling, choosing to read a book on investing, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, having some hardships that drove you into a new space. Hearing about your loss at the state tournament and how that pushed you in a new level, it almost seems that going over to Kuwait, dropping into that darker space, increased your desire to get back and take action when you returned.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's interesting. I haven't thought about it quite that way, but yeah, no, absolutely. And it's funny. I definitely didn't expect us to talk so much about wrestling, but it really did define a lot of those early years. And I really took a lot of that into life. Like I took on real estate investing the same way I took on wrestling, right? Was I had a belief first. I believed first, hey, this is what I'm going to do. I had no idea how, right? So it was a very similar approach to the state tournament, like or wrestling was, hey, this is my goal. This is what I'm going to do. I'll figure out how to do it. I'm willing to put in the work. I'm willing to learn, but I have to be fully committed to my mind first. And then yeah, specific to the deployment, I mean, I joined knowing that yeah, that was possible. We could get deployed. The Oregon National Guard hadn't been deployed since World War II. I was in an infantry unit. Did I think it was likely back in '99 and when I joined? Absolutely not. But at the same time, I signed up, I committed to something. I mean, we had guys that went AWOL. We had guys that didn't go. Most of us weren't these like, hey, yeah, let's go to war. It was like, hey, shit, we signed up. We need to honor our commitment and go. And it was fast because 5 days we were gone. We trained in Colorado for 2 months. We actually had a pretty decent job in Kuwait, but then we also got sent to Iraq for 3.5 months of that year. In my mind back then, it was, hey, I'm going to survive. I knew in my mind, I was like, I'm coming home. I'm coming home, and I'm not going to come home fucked up. Like that was kind of my commitment to myself in my mind when I was over there.
Nice, dude. That's huge.
And when I come back, I'm going to start buying real estate. I mean, that was there too.
Nice. So you got that first deal. You started what's now called house hacking. I don't even know if it was called house hacking back then.
I'd never heard of house hacking back then. I mean, it wasn't until like over a decade later. Yeah.
So you started house hacking. So those that are new, can you explain what house hacking is and how that process helped you elevate further?
Yeah. House hacking can be many, many things. But essentially taking a property and finding a way to maximize the use or rent out bedrooms. I mean, even buying a duplex could be a house hack. So I just bought a single family home, bought with no money down. I rented out two out of three of the bedrooms. I lived for less than I could have anywhere else. Some people will convert a garage or convert a basement, but it's really just optimizing a property so that you can live for free or for less than you would otherwise. So I rented a room to my brother. I rented a room to a friend of mine, and that covered most of the mortgage.
Right. So you did this to live on, you did this so that you could have less overhead. And then you started that process of redeployment of your assets.
Yeah, it was. I mean, I didn't know the term house hacking. It just made good financial sense, right? Like live in one room and have the whole house and rent out the other rooms and live for less than I could anywhere else. So yeah, that was during the subprime when they were giving loans to everybody, and you always hear the horror stories about people overpaying and losing their house. But I bought well. I bought that home in 2005. Bought another one in 2006, another one in 2007. And those were all no money down. Banks were just giving loans. And I remember thinking like, hey, this is easy. As long as I can rent the property for more than my mortgage is, I'm cash flow positive. I'm just going to buy a house a year. And so that was my initial thought. I had also opened up a small nutrition store inside of a gym in 2006. And then, yeah, by 2008, I just had those 3 homes. My store wasn't making any money at all. And I was like, what am I going to do? And so I took a bunch of odd and end jobs. Again, no college education, no high paying job as a backup plan. And I went back to the bank in 2008 and said, hey, I want to get another house. And they're like, well, hold up. Guidelines have changed. You don't qualify. You actually have to have a down payment. You have to have a job. You have to have money, all these things I didn't have. And I said, but I have these other 3 houses. I've always made my payments. And they're like, sorry, guidelines have changed. And that's when I really got into the creative financing of real estate. And I've built up the rest of my real estate portfolio all with untraditional financing. So all through seller financing, eventually private money, hard money. And yeah, that's what I do to this day.
Sweet. So just for our listeners that are new to the game, can you briefly go over, or even maybe deep, who knows, seller financing and what that process looks like?
Yeah, I mean, I could talk hours on seller financing because I really enjoy it. So seller financing in kind of the short term is rather than going and getting a bank loan. A lot of people are very familiar with the bank loan. First, you have to qualify, and the bank tells you, here's the down payment you need, here's the interest rate, here's what, and here's your monthly payments. And it's kind of a take it or leave it. You either qualify or you don't, and you're more or less subjected to whatever terms the bank tells you. Well, I wasn't bank financeable. The bank wouldn't qualify me for a loan. And I had read about and only knew the other options were borrowing money. Well, I knew nobody with money at all. And so private money, hard money. Hard money would be like a higher interest loan from a lender. I also didn't even feel comfortable asking for that because I had very little experience. And then seller financing. And seller financing is really, rather than getting a bank loan, you're asking the seller to be the bank. So in the most simplest form, rather than making your mortgage payments to the bank, you're making them directly to the seller. Not in all cases, but in a lot of cases, the home's owned free and clear. The sellers, if they've owned that home for a long period of time, and you're just giving them, and you're just paying it down, or giving them monthly payments. And the greatest thing about seller financing is the terms are as flexible, as creative as you and the seller can get. And so everything I bought from 2000, I started buying all these smaller, medium-sized multifamily properties. Everything I bought from 2009 to 2013 was all no money down. Not every seller wants a down payment. I don't know how much you want to go into this because, again, I could go pretty deep into seller financing, but sellers typically are sensitive of the price, the interest rate, the down payment, or some aspect of the terms, but not every seller wants the same thing. I was fortunate enough to have literally no money, and so I had to get creative. I had to find sellers that were willing to sell me the house or sell me the property with no money down because I had no money to put down. And so, yeah, we would agree on price, we'd agree on terms. And my only criteria back then was, hey, it has to be cash flow positive. I'm in this, no money out of pocket. Worst case scenario, I'm cash flow from day one. Never had to do this, but if I had to give the property back because I couldn't afford the payments, that was the worst case scenario. And that's how we set it up. And so my only criteria, if it's cash flow positive, that's an infinite return on my money because I have no money out of pocket. It's more risky to not do the deal than to do the deal and of all the what ifs that could happen.
That's huge. And that's a big thing. I love that word risk because that's been something that has been a theme through this whole conversation. And you switch risk, you switch it. What if I don't take action? What's the risk? As opposed to, if I do this, what could go wrong? Can you expand on that mindset process and just with your decisions now, maybe in real estate, but also with other endeavors?
Yeah, specific to that deal and in real estate, it was very much like, so from 2008 to 2009, I was looking for seller finance deals. I was on Craigslist every single night. I was talking to people. I was telling people what I'm looking for. And a lot of people are like, people don't do seller finance deals anymore, which is not true. They'll say that today. And I just closed on a property, which was partial seller financing like just yesterday. So, I guess you'll have people tell you, oh, you can't do something like, and it's not always true. It's whether or not you believe that, but just because someone else doesn't believe it doesn't mean it's an absolute. And I had a lot of people saying, isn't that risky? It was two duplexes side by side. And I had looked at properties for a year and I talked to sellers for a year and a lot of the terms didn't work for me. That's why I didn't buy those properties, but I put in the work. I went through the process. And so when a deal came that did make sense, I knew it made sense because I had gone through the process. So then I'm asking myself, oh shit, what am I missing? Is there something I'm missing? This pencils, this cash flows. This is 4 units, 2 duplexes, like this makes sense. And then I thought of all the what ifs, and I had people saying like, well, what if the tenants move out? What if they destroy something? I had no cash reserves, and I'm not saying don't have cash reserves is the way to go, but I'm looking at it from, okay, I could buy the property and potentially really start on my wealth building journey. It's cash flow positive, and so what's the worst case scenario? And I really looked at it as simply as that, like the risk of not buying the deal, the risk of not buying the property outweighed all the what ifs that could happen. Yeah, I had bad tenants sometimes. I had tenants that moved out and had oh shit moments of like, I really don't have money to redo this property, but I could get some recycled paint and paint like, like I was just scrappy in the beginning.
Yeah.
I don't operate that way today, but it was like I just had to be scrappy, and all the what ifs that could happen, most of them didn't. And then that gave me the confidence to buy the next one and the next one and the next one. And I actually think it's the more properties you have that are cash flow positive, it's actually less risky, because then you have the other properties not just supporting themselves. If you have one of those oh shit moments, you have multiple lines of income, multiple flows of cash flow, even if initially it's not a lot, to support the whole portfolio.
Absolutely. And that process, I think, is like this, like we talked about with wrestling, it's the same process. You've built yourself into the state champion. You built yourself into through doing the reps. And it didn't start with freshman year going to state. It was like freshman year, I'm learning the techniques, I'm getting my ass kicked. And it sounds like it was a similar situation for you. Like it's a long journey. It's not a get rich quick operation. I remember you telling me like that you were, you were, there's the 100%er, you were a 100%er way before you were a millionaire. And even though your margins were very thin, can you talk a little bit about like what the 100%er is and how your journey towards building wealth went with that?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't know what a 100%er was back then, but I understood the concept. So like 100%er, I mean, I'm part of a mastermind, Go Abundance, and 100%er is when you get to where your passive income, your horizontal income, essentially covers all your basic expenses, and so then you're financially free. So 100%er would be, you don't have to show up to work to cover your expenses. You have enough passive flows that cover those expenses. And so yeah, I did become financially free really fast and really young, but I was poor as shit. I mean, like I owned a bunch of like several properties, and I wasn't wealthy, but I looked at it as I understood that building wealth and making money wasn't the same thing. And I chose building wealth. And so I knew that real estate was my path to not just financial freedom. And so, yeah, at 27, I'm like, hey, I'm retired. I'm never going to work again. Not that I didn't have to work, but at 27, my income from my real estate covered my basic expenses. Now, I didn't have fancy anything, right? I mean, I drove shitty cars, and my friends that had to spend every day working were out financing cars that they couldn't and shouldn't be affording. I just didn't care. I didn't care what it looked like to others. I was very focused on, and it wasn't about making money, it was about building wealth. And I knew that real estate, those were assets. And in the most simplest form, it was lessons from the Rich Dad Poor Dad book of, hey, assets put money in your pocket, liabilities take money out. And I just didn't have a lot of, I had like almost no liabilities, and I was just focused on buying assets that cash flowed. And I kept it that simple, especially early on.
Cool. And it just continues to snowball.
Oh, absolutely. And it's, and I mean, you touched on something. It's not a get rich quick. Like I've been able to build a ton of wealth through real estate, but it started with that first house. That first house isn't what made me wealthy, right? But it was that decision to buy that first property. And then it gave me the confidence to buy the next one. And then my first seller finance deal, like that gave me the confidence to buy the next one and the next one and the next one. My first apartment deal, the first time I bought a mobile home park, right? Like that was a proof of concept for me. And then that gave me the confidence to buy the next one. And so I think taking action is a big part. Like you have to have that belief in your mind that you have to be willing to take action. I know people that overanalyze the shit out of things and they never take action. Now you got to not make reckless decisions, but at some point you have to pull the trigger and do it. And when you do it, it gives you the confidence to do the next one and the next one. And it actually becomes easier. I feel like the way I invest today and the things I invest in today, they're bigger deals and it feels easier. They're more units. They're a higher dollar amount, and it feels easy because I put in the work that gave me the confidence and experience to be at that point where I can make those decisions. And I think at some point I'll look back and be like, oh, these were small deals, the ones I'm doing now.
Yeah,
Which these are big deals compared to what I was doing, back then.
absolutely. So I want to jump into a different sector, and that is, I know I have a lot of friends that their work is their drive, and it just hones in, and it really becomes like that identity. And you've done a fantastic job where, all right, you've become financially free. Now what? And from what I see, you have a lot of fun things that you do with your life and visions and things that you want to do with your time here on earth. Can you talk about, all right, great, now you're financially free, how do you deploy that time now?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's a really good question. It's a mix of a few things, because part of it was, so going back to when I read Rich Dad Poor Dad, I went and like preached to the world, like, I'm going to be rich. I'm going to be rich. I really thought it was about the money. I mean, I'm like 19, 20 at the time. I'm like, I'm going to be rich. And then, through reflection later, and I enjoy the journey. Like, I absolutely love building wealth. I think it's more art and less science. Like, it's fun. I enjoy it. I've had people say, when's enough? I enjoy the game. I look at life as a game. I look at investing as a game. I enjoy it. As long as I enjoy it, I'm going to keep doing it. But there was a period of time of like, I was on a walk, and I remember thinking, like, why do I want to build wealth? Why do I want to be, back then I would just say I want to be rich. And I do think there's a difference between rich and wealthy. But I remember reflecting and being like, it's not about swimming in a pile of money. It's not about like showing the world, hey, look how successful I am, which maybe there's some ego, like maybe there's a chip on my shoulder from like trying to prove to myself or prove I don't know, maybe like I've been exploring that a little bit. And I think sometimes that can drive you too, right? And that's okay if you're honest, like, with yourself about it. But for me, reflecting, it was really about like, I want to be wealthy because I want to own my time. I want to be able to do whatever the hell I want to do, whenever I want, with whoever I want, and have that freedom. It really came down to the freedom, my freedom of time, my freedom of where I decide to spend my energy. Like, I want to be able, I mean, I had young kids at the time. It's like, I want to be able to hang out with my kids. I want to be able to, I don't want to have to show up to work and work for someone else. I don't want someone else telling me what I have to do every day. And that became my drive. Like, I realized that I wanted to be financial free. It wasn't about the money. It was about the freedom. And so to this day, I make sure that the things that I do, the things that I invest in, align with those things that are most important to me. I make sure that I'm actually not doing things and activities. And sometimes that can be challenging, especially, early on, like, hey, does this actually align with how I want my life to look? But I'm just conscious and I make sure that I don't involve myself in a lot of things that actually suck and take my time away. Because I've watched people build amazing businesses, and I do believe, like, some people love the grind. Some people, like, they'll work 100 hours a week regardless, no matter how wealthy they become. That's not me. That's fine if that's you. Like, you get the Gary V's of the world, like, that just like work. And if you love that and that's your true self, then great. But that's not me. To me, I just want to have the freedom to do what I want when I want. And so I've built my investments in my life around that simple concept.
Right on. I love that. I just wanted, because I want to honor who you are as a man here. Like, what are some of the adventures that you've been on with that time that you've deployed?
Gosh. I mean, my wife and I love traveling. That's a lot of it. I mean, on the home front, it's just being able to really just spend time together, and also with the kids. I mean, yeah. We do weekly dates with the boys. We went on a 2-month road trip last year. We pulled them from school when everything was shut down, and jumped in an RV, which we'd never done before. Before that, we went to Maui for a month. Did the RV trip. We've done some smaller trips, and then last March, we went on a really just a couple months ago, Alyssa and I, we went to Necker Island with Richard Branson and several other couples. And that was just an amazing, the most beautiful private island that I'd ever been on. Nothing, just beautiful place in the British Virgin Islands. But just being able to have the opportunity to do things like that. I mean, that doesn't happen without the freedom of time. It doesn't happen without being financially free. Our very first experience with that was in 2017. We went to Belize for a month, and we did some cool adventures, but mostly we just lived, we just hung out. And so
Yeah,
I want to be able to have that freedom to move freely through life as we please.
that's awesome. I love that. All right. So last question. If, it's tough because Gabe's a very unique individual. So maybe this is a message to your 15, 16-year-old self, or maybe this is a message to the 15, 16-year-old kids out there that may be listening to this. What advice would you give high schoolers today if they're interested in, playing by a different set of rules in life?
Wow. I mean, the first thing that comes up is just being true to yourself. I think at those ages, there is a period, like exploratory period. I mean, you and I both have 14-year-olds, right? And so it's like, they're figuring it out. Like we were figuring it out back then. I mean, I don't think I was even comfortable in my own skin until I was like in my 30s, right? And like, where does that come from? I don't know, but I think there's a period of time, and maybe that is shorter or longer for others. At 14, 15, 16, we're all just figuring it out. I mean, I'm 40 and I'm still figuring things out, right? But I think the biggest thing is like, just be true to who you are. Like, it doesn't matter the way the world sees you. Like, who is your true authentic self? What is it that you really want in your life and out of life, and go pursue that. I mean, this is the life that we get. Figure out what you're passionate about and explore that and go towards that. It doesn't matter, what and as a parent, it's like, it's hard to say, right? But it's true. It's like, it doesn't matter what our parents want for us. It doesn't matter what our teachers want for us. I think as parents, we need to believe and support our children. But ultimately, like, in a few years, those 15, 16, 17-year-olds, like, they're adults, and society's going to view them as adults. And it doesn't matter. Like, some kids have great childhoods, some have shitty childhoods. It doesn't matter. Like, we've all experienced stuff. At some point, you're a grown-ass adult and you have to decide for yourself. And I think the sooner that a young person can realize and figure out who they are and what they truly want without all the outside noise telling them what they should be doing. Oh, you should go do this. You should go do that. Because a lot of people end up following a path that somebody else put them on. And the person that put them on that path don't even know why. That's just what society and kind of the status quo has been like, oh, you should go do that. And so many people, I feel like, walk through life doing what they were told they should do rather than doing what they truly want. That's a long ass answer, but that's, yeah. I mean, just like, be who you are and go towards that.
I love that. Sweet, man. Gabe, this has been a fantastic episode. Thank you for being on. And I wish you the best in your journey and look forward to chatting again soon.
Likewise. Thanks for having me on, Thomas.